Hi there, today we're going to be painting and drawing a beautiful lilac freesia. And this is one of those flowers that you can buy at the supermarket more or less everywhere, and well, certainly in the UK. And it's one of those flowers that the scent is just intoxicating. So although you don't get that many to a bunch, they're lovely to sort of put in with other flowers for a table display. The scent is amazing. So what I'm going to do, I've already painted up the basic washes of an enlarged freesia. So and I've taken two views of a freesia and put them back to back. So I'm going to show you the first stages of the laying the washes, and then I'm going to show you how to build up the detail. But what I wanted to do as well was add to a study page of freesias some lovely drawings, well hopefully they'll be lovely, of how we start to draw something like a freesia. So I've got a flower here which I've pulled off one of the stems, and you can see the structure of it. It's quite a simple little flower. I've got three inner petals which are true petals, and then these three outer petals which are like sort of sepal petals, so to protect it. And then inside we've got the style and stigma, which is the little branch, lilac branch, and then we've got three anthers on their filaments, and right at the middle in the throat you can see there's the lovely yellow throat, which obviously you can see much easier on the outside. And then you've got these little green leaf sepals at the base. So this has a lovely sort of cup look to it, but it also has a little trumpet as well. So I tend to, when I'm looking at flowers of this shape, is I tend to sort of offer it up. If I show the camera lady today, what I normally do is I choose the angle that I'm going to draw it from, and then I've got 3 points for the inner petals and then 3 points for the outer petals. So it's basically a triangle, and I'm laying two triangles over the top of one another. So the easiest way to show you this is to draw it. So if I put 3 points for my 3 inner petals, and then I draw very lightly what I'm seeing, then I've got a triangle like so, with the tops of the petals coming down. And then I've got the 3 outer petals, so if I put the point of each of those, and I can measure how high the outer petals or sepals are next by just laying my pencil across. I think I've shown that to you before, and certainly in books, but it's just a way of finding out the level and the angle. So if that's horizontal and we're tipping it down to meet the other one, or if I'm holding the flower that way, we're tipping it up, and we can see the angle and the points of those petals. So if I put the point of that petal, the point of this petal, and the point of the petal coming towards me, so they're sort of sitting in between the inner petals, and then I can just draw another triangle over the top. You don't have to draw the triangle. I quite like drawing the triangles. It makes me feel like I'm a mathematician or something, but it's also quite a nice little guide. And then I just draw in the petals that I can see, and then this is the point of the petal that's foreshortened, so I'm going to draw the petal foreshortened. I'll turn it around and show the cameraman, camera lady, camera person what I'm seeing, so that you can see the same thing. So basically if I turn that towards you, you can see that if you look at this straight on, you're just seeing a cup with a flat top. So that's what I've drawn here for my sepal that's coming towards me. So all I do now is I just fill in the petals, how they sit within those triangles. So I'm just going to have a little look. And I can see inside the trumpet, so I can see in and round the far edge of these petals, like so. I've got the other petal there sitting around the outside, and then these petals are coming together and sort of curving back on themselves. This one's coming in front, and then this one, I've probably made it a little bit too wide, it's coming in just a little bit there. When I'm drawing, I tend to sort of leave the lines that I've made that are wrong, because if you rub them out, A, you're sort of stressing the paper out quite a lot, and B, you probably put a line straight down that you've just taken away. So it's quite nice to know where not to draw. So I leave the incorrect line there and avoid drawing it. So this is the angle that I'm sort of looking at here, and this is the angle that I'm drawing onto the paper. So I can see coming below that, I can see the trumpet coming down, probably not that wide. I'm going to just shorten it because it's a little bit foreshortened because it's tipping towards me, and then there's a lovely little neck. It's a bit like a goblet. I suppose if we were going to describe a shape that everyone could relate to, it would be a goblet shape. And then I'm just going to draw in the little sepals how I see them, as though I could see through them, and then this goes into the centre. So that's one way of looking at the drawing the freesia and sort of trying to sort of work out its mathematical layout. And at least if you do it this way, you will get all of the parts more or less in the right place, because it's very easy to sort of make some snap judgments on where petals are if you're just going freehand. I'm just going to put in my stamen now. I'm going to put in the anthers first, and then a little bit longer coming in front. That one's just a little bit longer, and then the filaments going down into the centre. So that's one way of drawing your flowers individually. If I offer my flower up to my drawing, you can see that I've slightly enlarged it. Often the way when you're describing something and you're just doing a quick demo of a drawing. So a good way of measuring something is to actually put your pencil up against it. Some people will use dividers, and that's perfectly acceptable. What I tend to use is the tip of the pencil and then my thumbnail, and then I can roughly work out, if I go there, how wide my flower head needs to be, and then I'll do the same for the height. Close one eye, I put the tip of the pencil to the highest point and my thumb to the lowest point, and then I can just mark out how wide and how long rather. So then I would just it'd just be a matter of then just marking in my triangles. So if I went up here and across there for my inner petals, sounds quite nice, doesn't it, having an inner petal? So then I'm going to bring my outer petals up and sort of roughly to that width. Just bring that over a little bit. I need to move the inner triangle over a little bit because this petal sits out a little bit further. And this one comes up a little bit higher. And then I've got the foreshortened one in front again. So this time I'm bringing it up a little bit higher so that we get more of a nice sort of cupped feel to the flower. So let's look at drawing this in then. We're going to do the same thing with our petal a little bit higher up this time. We're going to have it standing up a little bit higher, and I've got the inner petals sort of coming in to meet one another like so. And then a nice sort of curve to create the cup part of the petals, how they cup in. And then a really nice trumpet down here, curling it in and putting on the stem. So I know I've got the right height. I just need to now work out how wide my outside petals need to be and make sure that I don't go too wide. So we can make some little adjustments to our drawing. If we want to bring this petal up a little bit, we can, and we can also foreshorten that in a different way, so we can have it bending and then widening out and coming into a little point. So always worth playing around with drawing the petals. Have a little play. So one of the other things that's really nice to look at on the freesia is the branching, the lovely flower branch that all the flowers sit on. So if I was to take just the upper part of this branch, you can see that it it zigzags all the way up, and this is really nice to look at, but it's also quite easy to get wrong. So have a little look at that. Let's draw that. So I've set my flower up so that I can see it to draw it, and what I want to do is just walk you through that lovely sort of candelabra arrangement. So if I took this as my flower that sat further away, I'm going to put him on this beautiful sort of arched stem. So I'm going to put that lovely arched stem just there, and about an inch above that flower, let's just put in his sepal there, just for argument's sake. He's pointing the wrong way, but we'll leave him there for the moment, just for argument's sake. And what we'll do is we'll go up an inch from there, and then there's a lovely green sepal that is the base of the second flower, or the third flower up, I should say. And then from this junction, the stem moves out in a very slight curve at this sort of angle, and then goes up. There's another flower behind here, and then it goes up almost vertical, and then it crosses over in another arc, sort of little semicircle there, and then it goes up again. So at each junction there is a flower. Some will be in front and some will be behind. So it's worth just putting your little stem on just to sort of mark it. So what you could do is you could just mark on the ones that are in front. So if we just mark on that little sepal there, and we know that we've got a bud just there. Then it goes sideways and branches out just a little bit, so it widens out just a little bit. So it goes from skinny, where that first flower is, and goes a little bit wider, and then heads uphill again. And then we've got another little bud there, and then it's going to scoop over here, and another little bud there. We'll just draw over our drawing, and then another scoop, another bud, and then another scoop, and the bud starts to tip out this way, so it starts to head off and become slightly horizontal. So you can see this lovely sort of zigzag nature. Now if I draw just a little bit harder, what we can do now is come back and put the stems on as they go up and branch out. So if I put the width of the stem on now, so I'm going to just come down, and you can see it just tapers slightly towards each flower. So this is quite a big bud, and actually it's coming up a little bit more vertical, so I'm going to bring that over and bring the bud up, slight curve out, and then the bud is a little bit higher than the next bud. So for argument's sake, I'm just going to make him this shape, and then we can add the detail in later. So then it goes up here, and then we've got a bud that's heading away from us. So we've got a sepal going away from us and a bud going away from us. And then behind here, this one here, we've got a bigger bud, and that's literally going behind everything and disappearing behind there. So I'm drawing them as though I can see all the way through, and if we think of it as like a little candelabra with lots of little bulbs, little light bulbs all the way up, and they're all at slightly different angles, that's what we've got to draw. And each little branch widens before it meets the bud. So you can see that it's widening, and a little bit of widening down to a narrower line there, and then this one up here is going up, and there's like another little bulb coming out there, and so on. And then it starts to branch sideways. So obviously the more you twist it, the more different angles you're going to get. So if you pick the flower up, I've just rested it on the table for a moment. So if you're moving it around, you can see that if you're having it at one angle, it's going off there, but if you're looking at it directly on, you get more of the zigzag effect. So face on, looking underneath the buds, you've got the lovely zigzag, but on the side you can see it sort of branching out like lovely little light bulbs on a branch. So take a little bit of time to look at your flower and really become familiar with the shapes and the sizes. And actually what's quite nice is to have parts of the plant drawn up really precisely. And sometimes I will have snipped certain elements, so I can snip this part and draw these two flowers separately and then draw this bit separately, because sometimes when they're all together it's really hard to see how they go. And you can end up with all of these crazy drawings everywhere. So take a little bit of time and maybe even dissect the plant and pull it apart so that you can really see how things work. Of course, the buds are really beautiful, the way they curl over, and then they've got these occasionally these little pinches at the top of the petals, and they're rather nice to put in. And then you have these beautiful colours, which hopefully we'll deal with on the lovely painting. So I'm working on St Cuthbert's Mill, Saunders Waterford block. This is a lovely block that I've got, and like I say, I'm working from a photograph for these fixed views of them, and you can see that the branch is heading down on these. So each flower will have its own pretty aesthetic way of branching. Sometimes they'll go down, sometimes they'll go up, but have a little look and twist the flower around. This is what I do. I twist it around to find the best view. When I'm happy with the best view, I take a quick little sketch of it, maybe a couple of photographs, and then I'll do a little colour swatch just to check the actual colours so that I'm happy with how they are. So the greens are really important because in a photograph the greens will change. So it's really nice to have something fresh if you can, just to also look at how the stem works. You know, you've got this lovely little crease down here, like a little seam along the stem, which then sort of runs in line with this little sepal. So you get these lovely little niche details that you don't see in the photograph. Always quite nice to make a little note of those alongside. I'll add some little notes and I'll draw some things up, and I'll show you this as a study page so that you can draw that up as well. So while we're talking about drawing, I want to just draw up the little buds, because often you have secondary flowers that when they're cut they remain juvenile, but they're quite a nice little thing to draw. So if I lay that down, I can just draw it alongside here. So again, we've got this wonderful sort of overlapping feel to it. First of all, what I would do is generally draw the overall shape of it, so I get an idea of the size of the whole set of little buds, and then a nice stem. I always make my stems just a little bit thinner than they actually should be, because when I paint them I allow myself a little bit of wiggle room. But when you're drawing them you should make them as perfect as possible. So here we've got the first little sepal that's overtaking like so, and then we've got a little branch coming up here, and this is where we can be a little bit more specific on the shape, and that coming out and turning out. And these are lovely little things to draw, just a really nice exercise, both of observation and pattern. So that tucks in there and comes out there, and then joins on. You can just about make out the little stem there, and then coming off that stem, another small stem, and another little goblet, sepal, and then in again, a little bit like that, in again, a little bit like that, and then this one overlapping and coming down, and then just a little one at the top. So that's a really nice little thing to draw. No stress, nice and easy, and you could practice these before you do the flowers. This would be a great practice because you're not only practicing the greens, but you're practicing the drawing as well. So let's move on to painting the flowers. I realised that one could spend ages talking about drawing, but I just wanted to give you a little introduction as to how I start. researching my flowers and then working out the layout is usually a little bit of a drawing and moving things around. This one I quite liked, the yin yang. I quite liked the way this one was curling over and then I swung it around and I got a view of the flower going the other way. So what I want to do is I want to just run through the first washes for the first part, and for that we're going to work from a photograph. So I'm going to start at the top with this lovely flower on the side, and they're always the easiest ones to do. Any flower that's on the side is always my favourite. I know it's nice to look inside a flower, but it's quite nice to just have an easy moment. So I'm going to mix up some dark Zazine purple, and I'm going to mix quite a lot because we're going to need a lot. So I'm going to put dark Zazine purple in a big puddle on one side, and my colour that I'm going to mix it with, I'm going to try French ultramarine to create a lovely sort of lilac shade. And then what we're going to do is we're going to water that down for our very pale petals and then make it a little bit darker for our darker petals. So just starting at the side, I've got a photograph which is very big, so it's bigger than my actual drawing, but that's quite nice because I can see the detail a bit better. So what I'm going to do is just do some of these little side ones first, and I'm just going to glaze the whole side petal like so. Now I would say to you probably don't need to glaze such a small area, but because it's purple and purple can be quite staining, and because it's quite light and some areas are transparent, it's quite nice to have a little bit of water just to give you a sporting chance of making it nice and pale. And also what we're doing is we're glazing the whole of this side petal, which is actually in two parts. So I'm going to put a colour over the whole area, and then when it's dry, define the front edge of this petal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump around because we don't want to work next to the wet edge. So I'm going to do this pale area at the back here, petal that's pushed behind. So a little bit of purple water now, and just putting that onto the petal. So this is the Saunders Waterford. It's the 140 pound weight, so the lighter weight. And the difficulty with that is if you remove it from the block, you will get a little bit of cockling. I do have a tutorial where you can stretch the paper. If you wanted to, you could stretch it beforehand. If you can put up with a little bit of the cockling while you're painting, you can stretch it at the end. So what I'm doing here is I'm dropping the lilac from the top so that it remains nice and pale towards the base. So keep it really, really light. Just put a little bit of the colour at the top and just let it literally run downhill. I'm going to jump over to this one over here, which belongs to a different flower, but it's a little bit stronger. So what we're doing is putting the glaze on. And here I've got a little bit of a sort of smaller inner petal that's going to get in the way, a little darker one. Sometimes the Freesias do little crazy things. They get little extra petals which are right in the middle of the flower, which can be a bit disconcerting. But anyway, we're going to work around it. On this one, I'm just going to mix up the colour just a bit stronger. And again, I'm not going to put the ridges on, I'm just going to put the background lilac on. So start at the top, put the lilac on, and slow your brush down so you get a nice crisp edge, and you just want to run that down and finish exactly on your pencil line. It's a bit like a jigsaw. We're working out each petal and finding out where it is and where it goes to, and then seeing if it fades towards the centre. And then once we're happy we've got it in the right place, we can then sweep through just to get a little bit of light here and there. A clean damp brush, take all the water out of the brush, place it where you want to lift and push the brush so that you can lift a little bit of the colour away. put it where you want it and lift. Now this is our first glaze, so we don't want to lift a lot back. We want to keep it quite nice and simple, and then we can come back and add more colour if we need it. So the lifting is really just to help us sculpt the shape of the petal. So let's look at this one. This is the foreshortened one that we were talking about when I was drawing, and this one sits behind that petal and then folds back in front of us, so it's sort of creating this lip or tongue as it's coming towards us. And then it's got a lovely little scoop, which I haven't put on the drawing, but you can see it on the photograph. So again, I'm putting a little glaze on just to give us time to lift if we need to lift anything out. And I'm going to use the colour just a bit stronger again, so just a little bit more colour. And actually I'm going to make another little puddle. I'm going to add the smallest amount of Helios purple. This is just a little bit of a last minute change there. So more of the Helios and the dioxazine mixed together, a little bit of the blue. And I'm going to run the darkest part, which is on the outer lip, in that colour. And then very quickly pick up my original lilac and sit that next to it, so I get a nice strong edge to this petal. Use the point of your brush to draw the edge and pull it where you want it. And then I'm going to very gently tip that corner up, like so. So just before this foreshortened petal dries, I want to just wipe out a little bit of light where it curls back into the flower. So I'm just going to wipe along that edge. Probably wipe it 3 or 4 times just to get enough light out. Now you could, if you were careful, put the colour on and let it bleed towards a whiter edge, but actually it's quite nice, the colour that is left behind, that little stained colour is quite nice. Don't worry about cast shadows at this point, we're really just looking to get the actual base colour on. So I've got a little moment where I can slow the brush down, add a little bit more purple to the edge, but also get a much cleaner edge. In a perfect world, my painting would be a little bit nearer to me, but because we're filming it, it's got to be just a little bit too far away for me. Just softening that edge in. When it looks nice, walk away, leave it alone, because you don't want to fiddle with anything that's settling. So we're going to jump over now to this complicated but rather pretty petal at the back here. And you can see the difference in sizes. So when you've got a bigger petal like this, spend a little bit more time putting the glaze on. So I'm going to put some nice water through the middle. Just let it soak in. And then I've got a little area underneath here where the petal goes behind the one in front. When you're happy you've got it glazed nicely, just have a little assessment of where you need to put your stronger colours. So we've got some much lighter colour where we're coming into the centre of the flower, so I'm going to use a very watered down lilac there. Just really, really light. And then it goes a little bit darker at the top, so we'll go for the first mix. Just get that little top edge a bit darker. And then where it comes down, it's slightly pinker, so I'm going for my pinker mix, which is the Helios purple and dioxazine together. And I'm just going to drag that down really carefully so I get a nice edge. And as it tucks underneath here, my glaze is drying out. So quick little tip there, clean your brush and put some clean water just ahead of the colour that you've put on. And we also want to keep this really pale down here because this is where it tucks in to the throat of the flower, which is quite light. So I'm going to use some very light lilac just to come up. And then some water, just clean water there where we get a little bit of light in the middle. a little sweep here and there just to move the paint around where you want it. Very, very gentle and with a damp brush. And then I'm going to wipe through for this lovely streak down the middle. Now it's very tempting to keep putting colour on at this stage. It's very tempting to put another little bit of detail or something on this side of the petal, but if you do that, you're going to upset it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work around the flower, just dropping in those little glazes, analysing where the purples are stronger and keeping it light where the purples are light. And so we'll do the top part of this, which is quite complicated, just jumping around, making sure you're working where it's not wet. And then we'll come back and we'll start to do the one, the back of the petals where they meet the lovely yellow throat of the trumpet part of the flower. So we'll do that together. So I've mapped in all the top petals, and as you can see, if you do it just one by one, it's nice and easy to get those lovely smooth washes. So now we're going to do this lovely complicated petal where it comes down, and at the bottom of the flower you can see that they're all fused together. So as the petals come down, they all sit together and are all connected. So I'm just going to remove some of the pencil just at the base there. And I'm going to mix up a little bit of the warm yellow. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my, where did I put him? There he is over there. I've lost the flower. I'm going to look at my flower. You can see that in the photograph it's a little bit darker, but it's also a darker flower. So I'm going to keep it somewhere between this lovely yellow and this lovely fresh yellow there. Somewhere between the two should be accurate. If we have a look at this one, you can see it's a little bit warmer as the flowers get a bit older. So we're going to mix up a little bit of Sennelier yellow. And I'm going to add just the tiniest amount of pink to it, a little bit of rose, that's all. And then the rest of it is going to be very watered down lilac. So I'm just going to get the lilac and water it all the way down. So I'm going to put the bottom of the flower in water. And we're going to bring the colour uphill. So water to about there. And then I'm going to put very, very pale lilac, really pale at the bottom. And it's going to be so pale you barely see it. So put a little bit on and then just move it around. And then above that, a little bit of the yellow. Sorry, that's Buzz. Got a little dog in the room. That's the noises you can hear in the background. So I'm putting the little yellow around the throat. And then above that, the very watered down lilac. So we get it almost transparent above that. And just let the two just meet one another. So you get a nice soft join. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just soften away that side. Leave a little dry gap, and then I'm going to catch the water here and just do this petal from this point upwards. So from the light lilac, I'm then going to put a nice water glaze over this petal above the yellow and the light lilac, so that I can just drop on some really strong colour. Now I'm going to just quickly, very quickly mix my colour up again with the blue and the dark Sazine violet, because we want it nice and strong up here. And I'm going to drop it down so that it blends down towards the pale lilac. So this should be a lovely soft cloudy edge where we've brought the water up to meet it, and now we're going to bring the colour across. Slow down when you get to the edge so you get a nice clean edge to it. Oops. I just went a little bit too wide. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the nibble. So I'm going to ignore the little cut edge, because that's just where the flowers got torn. So I'm just going to bring that down and soften it towards the lilac. Just tease that down with a damp brush. If it doesn't move all the way down, just tease a little bit of it down, just so you get that nice soft flush. And then walk away. And once that's completely dry, we can then do the petal that sits next to it and sort out that little area there, so we get a nice clean petal. So let's just run through that again, but with the green. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of green instead. I'm going to put some phthalocyanine blue into my Sennelier yellow. Get a little bit of green. And this one we've got the petals fused at the bottom again, but the bud is slightly coming towards us. So what I'm going to do is do the same again, but from the top this time. So I'm going to put the glaze precisely on the petal that's in front. Take it down to where the petal narrows slightly. I'm going to go for a mid lilac. A little bit too much paint on my brush there. If you've got too much paint, you'll know it, because the paint is flooding really quickly and you've got no way of controlling it. So if that happens, just dab your brush on the dab pad, just to reduce the amount of water and paint on your brush, and that way you stay in control. I'm going to bring my colour down to create the lovely shape of the petal. Then I'm going to use a little bit of very pale lilac through the middle. And then just some water. So we keep it really, really pale at the base. And then when I get to the base, just pick up that little bit of green and then plop the green in. So you get a nice little soft flush between the green and the petal. We'd leave that to dry, and then what we do is we just put in the petals surrounding once that's dry, one or the other. So I'm coming back up to the top now. This is all dried, so we can put a nice little quick glaze next to it. Now this time I'm going to put a little bit of water coming up from here, and I'm going to try and create the edge of that petal with the water. I'm going to drop a little bit of the pinky lilac just there to create that edge. Water it from the bottom. Pick up your pinky lilac and continue from the wet glaze there. And have it a little bit more controlled now because it's a small space. Bring the paint with you and fill in the little gap. We've just basically got to get that petal snuck in there and have it slightly pinker so that it just stands out next to those other petals. Keep an eye on the bottom because this should all be fused. So what you can do is you can just tap your brush down here and just keep softening it in so that you get everything fused at the base. So with that done, we can just then take different little elements of this, different little petals of this as they're curling over, and map those in, and then we can move to our bud. So rather than jump to the bud, jump to the next bit of this bud, I'm going to jump to the green and just run through that. So let's look at that. So we've got a really nice juvenile petal here that's green with a purple edge. So I'm going to water that area there, take it down into the neck. I've got my green. I'm going to put the green on. And because you've got a little bit of veining, just using my finger there to get it under control, because you've got a little bit of veining and a little bit of the lilac starting to appear, we're going to drop that in to the green. So I'm going to put the green near this edge here. I'm going to go for quite a strong purple, and I'm going to drop that at the top. Just let those two mix together, and then run that purple all the way around the edge so that it just bleeds into that green. Should give you just the right colour. And put a little bit more purple right on the top. See if we can get away with that really nice shot of really dark purple there. Clean your brush, roll it, take all of the water out, and then wipe through to get a little bit of structure. You can wipe either way, just be careful pulling too much purple into your green. A little bit more purple, and walk away. So each little petal is like that. We're going to put on the water, drop on the green, and then drop in the purple where you can see it. So I'll go back up here. I'm going to put in the little bit of warm yellow in here with a very pale lilac for the underneath in there. It's nice and cave-like. Just map in the missing bits of lilac at the top, and then put in the little bits of warm throat that you can see over here. And then we'll come back and we will map in the rest of our little buds, and then we will start working on the detail. And we're going to move backwards to the flower that I've already got ready to put the detail on. So we're going to demonstrate the washes on this one and the detail on that one. Hopefully you will have covered all bases then. So I'm just going to stop there and mix up some really nice greens for the stem and the buds. So let's mix up a few new greens. And I'm just going to make a little clean patch there. So I want to mix up a dark green. I don't want it to be as dark as on the photograph. So let's pull out a flower. I've got them here, which is rather exciting. And we can just lay that there so you can see the greens that I need. I'll just get the wet end away from my arm. So that's really useful just to have that, to see that it's quite dark on the picture. So what we want to do is want to mix up a really nice mid green. So I'm going to use some phthalocyanine, Snellia yellow, about even mix of those two together, so you've got a really good mid bright green. And then you want to take some of that, let's just do that next door, and I'm going to add a little bit of French ultramarine just to make a slightly darker green. So to that dark mix we're going to add a little bit of lemon. And the trouble is my brush keeps picking up all the colour. Does this ever happen to you? Where you've mixed it up and then all of a sudden it's all in the brush? It can be very annoying. Just take a little bit of water on your mixing brush and it should fall out of the brush onto the palette. So I'm just adding a little bit of that. Let's just make a little wall because I keep getting the colours blending together. So French ultramarine, Snellia yellow, a little bit of phthalocyanine, oh too much phthalocyanine, and a little bit of lemon. So we want it to be rich and bright but also darker than the other ones, so we can use that as a little bit of shadow. Okay, once we're happy with that, I'm just going to put that across my water pot. We're going to put in some of the stem and also some of these little sepals. So I've got a lighter green already mixed up over here, and I just want to wake that up. What I want to do is, on these sepals, they're quite transparent, so they have like a little papery edge to them. So you want to put a little glaze onto them. Maybe just do one at a time. And then use the mid green and put it towards the back of the sepal so that it moves towards the edge. Nothing too major there, and then with a damp brush just wipe along the papery edge, so that gives a nice little soft join between the green and the slightly transparent edge. Now you might find that some of them have got a little bit of colour in them. This one's got a little bit of lilac in the top, so you can just drop that in at the same time and then wipe again just to maintain that papery edge. So you could do each of those sepals independently, which I think would be really good because it will keep you sort of under control, as it were. So what you want to watch out for is when you bring the colour down to the stem, at certain points the sepals join seamlessly onto the stems, and then if I turn it around, you can see that you get this lovely continuum, but you get a nice little highlight as well. So you want to be aware of the little lights. If you're painting this from a fresh flower, you want to be aware of those little highlights along the stem. So I'm going to put some in that I can see on the photograph, and that's along here. I put a little bit of stem there, but I want to show you this little sepal coming around here. So if we put a little bit of the dark green, a little bit of water first. Just bring the water up, and you want these sepals on the outside to be connected to the stem. It's only small, but it's important. And then take a little bit of the dark green. So we're going to put that dark green next to here with a little shadow. And then the mid to light green, we're going to put it along one side and leave it, sort of jump the lights. We're going to go around the light. So put a little bit there and a little bit there. Always looks a bit messy at this stage, but just keep calm. Now a little wipe of the tip of your brush just where the light is, and just mop up any green that's coming into it. So try and keep that area really nice and bright. And then while while the paint's settling, you can just tease it very gently into where you want it to be. And if at any point you start losing the light, clean your brush, take the water out, and just put your brush where the light should be and mop away any green that sneaks into it. While that little bit of green is settling, you can just drop in an extra little bit of green, a little bit of dark. And then what I want to do is just wipe the top edge just to get that little silvery edge. It's all super fiddly. Even on this size, it can be quite demanding of your wiping and lifting skills. So just go nice and steady and lift where you want it lifted, and smooth where you want it smoothed. When you get something that's nearly there, leave it, because any sort of tidying up or perfecting can come when that's dry. So have a little look round, check where your lights are, perfect your drawing before you start moving on, and just take one little section at a time, thinking about the transparent edge and also any little highlights along the stem. Before I start mapping those in, I'm just going to run the stem in. I'm going to run a little bit of water down the stem. Probably won't do the whole length, just for now. We'll just go to there. And notice I'm just putting a little run of water straight down the middle of the stem. I'm not going up to the edge, I'm just putting a little line of water for the paint to move into. And then I'm going to use the bright green that we mixed at the beginning. I'm going to put that as my left-hand edge. And I'm just running it down so that the back of my brush is catching the water and the tip of my brush is making the edge of the stem. And I'm going as far as I can see the water. If it doesn't make a soft edge, just quickly run your brush along the side of that green line, just so it's got something to move into. At the bottom, if you haven't decided where your stem's going, just use a little bit of water and come back into it like so. I'm going to stir up my dark green, and I'm putting my dark green on the right hand side. Keep your brush right on its tiptoe so you can get a nice sharp line, and only do about 1.5 inches or 6 centimetres or something like that, and then just run your brush down to soften the edge. What you want is you want a little bit of light through the middle, so you can wipe through the middle just to get a little bit of a highlight. Like so. And then pick up your green, go back a little bit and continue down the stem. Now if you're worried about a wobble, do a shorter length, don't go as far with your green, and then soften and then have a little rest. Wipe out your highlight, take the water down a little bit further, have a little rest and then come back to it. And what you want to do is you want to get these two little lines coming down and meeting in the middle where it's wet. And if you're worried that it's run out of water after the first wash, you can run a little bit of water through before you continue with your dark green. Normally I turn my painting on its side so that I'm working from left to right. That's much easier, but we've got it stuck down for the tutorial, so I can't move it. So do bear in mind that you can move your paper around to work however is the most comfortable. Okay, so I'm going to map in some of my little sepals and the branch coming down here. When we get to the buds, you've got a really nice little wrap over. So what I've done is I've put on this one, I've put a little bit of water onto the bud and just dropped the bright green onto the tip of it. And the same here, I've put a little bit of water on either side for these two little juvenile petals, and then I've done like I did with the sepals and just wiped a nice bright edge. So on this one we're going to just use this sort of darkish green and just get a little bit of light towards the end. So I want to start adding detail now to our flower on the left hand side. So I've done exactly the same as I've done with the flower on the right hand side, where I've mapped everything in. The only thing that I've done, which I did before I started, was I put another extra little layer of lilac over this petal here, just to test the paper and see how it reacts to the second glaze. So there's a few little rough edges, but this is sort of one of those projects where I want to show you how to deal with little wobbly edges and hard edges, because you can see where I've laid the glaze on, we've got a little bit of a hard edge, and I want to show you how I work around that and make little adjustments accordingly. So we're going to start with the buds and work our way up to the flower. So I want to move down here to these lovely buds that are sort of semi-open and tight shut, because we've got our 3 greens that we mixed up for mapping in the greens on the other side, so we might as well use those to continue. So I want to have a little bit of very dark green for the shadowy parts of our leaf. Still got a bit of my green on my brush. So let's mix up a really dark green with Sennelier yellow, French ultramarine, and a little bit of Sennelier red. I wouldn't go much darker than that. So if I offer that up to my photograph, you can see that the photograph's a little bit darker than the colour that I've mixed. So I'm going to keep it a little bit lighter, because obviously the photograph has made it a bit too dark. So what we can do then is start down here on this little bud that's curling over. So on the photograph you can just see a little bit of one of the sepals just poking out. Let's see if we've got a flower that a live flower that we can take apart. Let's take this one. So basically when it gets to the end, we've got these little sepals that kick out. You can see they've got a nice little sort of corner to them, and that's the little point that we can see there going away from us. So it's like a little sepal with a nice little point that kicks out. So what I'm going to do, because the sepal is going this way, I'm going to put some nice little fine lines with my mid dark green that we mixed for the darker areas over here. And I'm just going to put some nice little veins, just showing that it's heading that way. It's important to describe which way it's going. So put a few on and just let them settle and dry. And while we've got that colour on our brush, let's put a few of the little veins that are going over the sepal here. Now on this sepal we've got a little bit of lilac on it, but I'm going to put the veins on in a dark green and then dry brush the lilac over the top. Just nice little sweeps there. We want to keep a little bit of shine there, but we want the veins to go through the shine. Like so. And then I'm just going to use the tip of my brush just to soften the end of those veins, because they blend away and disappear into the neck of the bud there. And I'm also just going to soften over the veins where they go over the highlight, and just dab with a bit of kitchen towel just to lighten them. That's a really good trick, that one. It's really helpful. So I think that's going to be dry pretty quickly. So I'm going to add a little bit of Opera Rose to my lilac. So a little bit of Opera Rose and Cobalt Blue will make that. And I'm just going to run a little bit of the lilac just with the tip toe of my brush like so. Really, really light, like a little dusty, hardly any paint on your brush. And if you want to soften it, do that really quickly, just with a little tickle of a damp brush. So I'm going to put some little veins to show the other side of the sepal as well, just to show the direction of that bud again. And then on our little stem we've got a lovely little cast shadow, and I want to put that on. So I'm going to take a little bit of my mid green, I'm going to add a little bit of rose madder to that green, just a little bit on the edge, just to sort of dull it down. I'm going to run a little shadow right across this stem. Show that it's coming from the other side, but I want this really strong shadow across there. And when that's dry, we can also dry brush on a little bit of lilac as well. So nice and simple. We'll let all of those little bits of detail dry before we start putting on some little washes to sort of knock them back and put them into shadow. So I'm going to continue up to the next one. I'm going to put some nice little purple veins onto this one because we've put purple and green together on the first wash. And you want to try and maintain this lovely little white edge because that's the little papery edge on the edge of the sepals, which is really important. And I'm also just going to, I'll just do this quickly with a bit of bright green. On the end of the bud, I'm going to paint the petal, the green petal underneath first, and then leave a little gap so we get a nice little white edge to the next petal, and then put a little bit of that colour just so we sort of define that little white edge. And I'll do the same but a little bit lighter on the top. So you can put a little green petal there and then leave a little gap and just a tiny bit of green to suggest that those little petals, those little juvenile petals are overlapping one another. So I'll put a little bit of detail onto these sepals, and on here where it's in very dark shadow, all I was going to do was just put on some little bit of green and just build it up a little bit lighter than it is in the photograph. So put a little bit of green on at the neck and then with a clean brush just soften it towards where it joins onto the stem. So nothing too dramatic on that, just keep it a little bit in the shadow and not too much detail. The other little area that I'm going to do here is just put a very pale lilac glaze over this. So on my first wash I put these green stripes on wet, but this is quite transparent here, but there's a little hint of lilac in there, so I'm going to put the very lightest lilac on that, and then when it's dry just build up a little bit of detail onto that sepal. So we'll get all of these areas built up with a little bit of veining. Do watch which direction the veinings are going, and do it in stages. So put the veining on, let it completely dry, as I'm going to do, and then I'll come back and show you the glazes to go over the top. So once you've put all of those little veins on, the next thing to do is to put a little wash over. So I'm going to use my size 4 and I'm going to put a very light glaze over the veins. You need to wait for them to dry so that they're permanent. I'm just going to use a little bit of the mid-green and I'm going to put a little glaze over the base of this bud, avoiding the edges so we keep that nice little papery white edge. And then very gently just soften further up. And your little veins should shine through nicely. Just do a light glaze to start with because you don't want to overdo it and then obliterate all of your work. That little glaze will fix everything, and then hopefully when that's completely dry you'll be able to go over the top again if you need to make it darker. So mix and match. I've got some light green here with the lemon mixed with a little bit of the phthalocyanine, I think. Mix and match because some areas will be a brighter green as a little glaze. And you could go right over the purple on this one because this is all in shadow. So I'm taking that light green right over the purple and the veins. And if it all looks nice, just soften the top edge and walk away because that's really important that you don't keep stroking because you'll lift off all the little veins. And what that does is it makes it look a little bit more natural, which is quite nice. So use a very light lemony wash if you feel like it's nice and bright, and use a slightly darker wash if it's darker. Obviously that's obvious, Billy, but you can use the two at the same time. So I've started with a little bit of the lemon wash there, and then doing a very small tea wash of the darker green. When you come back to soften any edges, make sure you haven't got too much water on your brush, otherwise it will feed back into the tea wash, which will lighten it, but it will also soften everything too much. So another little colour that you could have on your palette, I did clean my palette a moment ago, is a little bit of watered down cobalt blue. That's quite nice if it's a bit cooler on some areas. So instead of a green wash, you can do a little light cobalt blue, which will just give it a slightly shadowy feel. And that's quite nice as well. The blue violet, which we very rarely use, so let's roll out the blue violet. Blue violet is very transparent and almost sort of feels oily under the brush. So it's a very different feel to some of the other colours. But it's quite nice for doing very gentle washes. So I'm going to use a little bit of the blue violet just over that petal that's coming towards us. I'm going to use it as a little wash over the inside. And you can see, I'm calling it a wash, but it's a wipe with the tip of your brush, so it's not very much paint at all. I did put a little bit of a lilac glaze on here, but I'm just going to make it slightly pointed there and just wash behind. I'm going to use the blue violet as well to show the shadow across this sepal. So I'm going to paint over the bud and the sepal at the same time, so we get a nice sort of shadowy feel, and then continue the blue violet over the base of the bud. Let these little glazes dry, and if you need to go darker, once they're dry, then repeat. Don't keep putting the glazes on because that will soften everything too much. And if you feel like you're out of control, then probably you are, so take it easy. One of the other things I'm going to do just very quickly is just put a little glaze over this sepal that's tucking under, but also take it over the top one, so the whole area there gets a nice bright glaze over the top, just to freshen it all up. So you can see I've put one glaze on this area, one glaze on that area. This is looking nice and dark, but this probably needs to have another little glaze over it. So what I'll do is I'll glaze the other ones, and if you've got an area where there's a bit of bright light, what you can do is just put a bit of water where the bright light is so that your glaze doesn't darken that nice light. So we'll put these little glazes over these sepals just to pull everything together, and I'll probably go up to the top and then back down again. So have a little rest between putting the glazes on and build up to where you feel comfortable. So let's leave those buds to dry now, and what we're going to do is work on this lovely open flower. So it's coming towards us. We're not seeing any of its trumpet part, but we're seeing down into the throat down here, which is quite nice. And we've also got all the lovely the stigma and anthers and all of that style all coming towards us. I have put a little bit of an outline on this juvenile or little sort of stunted petal down there, but that's all I did. That was with a little bit of dioxazine purple, but I'll cover all of those little aspects as we go along. So if you've got outlines on after your first washes, so you can see this little build-up of paint along the edge, one of the things that you don't want to do is remove that if the rest of the petal needs to go darker. So if we look over here on the photograph, we've got this petal here, which is a lovely, beautiful lilac. So I don't want to put, you know, I don't want to get rid of this line if I can match the colour in. It is a little bit darker than I wanted, but I think what I want to do is put the wash on first, the second wash of colour, and just see how that plays out before I make any decisions. So a little bit of Winsor dioxazine purple rather. Went back to Winsor & Newton there just for a minute. So dioxazine purple. I'm also going to have a little puddle of dioxazine purple with a little bit of cobalt blue. I'm also going to wake up that blue violet. Always needs a proper wake up the blue violet, and have a transparent glaze for that. And then any other colours that we need we'll just mix up as we go along. So what I'm going to do is look at each petal individually. Now on this one I did a very basic wash because we've got a little bit of a folded petal behind here that's of a similar tone. So what I want to do is identify that first. So I'm going to use a little bit of the dioxazine purple with the cobalt blue and just draw that little folded petal, how it falls in front. Just using the tip of a number 2 brush I am. And then just outline where you want to go, and then I'm going to put the little shaded tucked part of that petal just in there and just soften it in. So this is something that you can do if you've got something that's very small that falls in front of a large petal. but it's of a similar tone. You can paint the large petal first and then paint your detail over the top. So I'm just going to take another little bit of that colour and leaving that little tiny edge, I'm going to just paint in the underneath shadow as well. And we'll leave that to dry because that's got to sort of settle and become permanent before we start working around it. A little bit more shadow there. So while we're waiting for that to dry, what we can do is we can define a couple of petals on the bud behind. So just with a very fine line, I'm going to just draw the edge of the overlapping petal. And then very quickly behind that edge, I'm just going to put a little bit of water and soften that line into that petal. And we can do the same on the other side. There's a little petal that's overlapping from the other side. Just put a little line and then soften on the other side of that. So we create these little petal edges very gently. So I'm going to do that just to get these little petals sitting behind established, and they can be drying and settling while we're working on the big flower. So let's go back to dealing with built-up edges. We're going to put a little glaze to match up to that, those two edges here. But on this one here, we've got this petal is disappearing over the edge, so I don't want this hard line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glaze behind that to make this petal darker and take some of that outer edge in with that petal. So I'll just use the blue and the lilac again. And I'm going to go from that line and try and match the line and the colour behind. So we don't get an outline, we just get an area. I'm hoping that makes sense. A line, not an area. And then I'm going to soften that colour into the petal so that I don't end up with a really dark petal. Just soften it towards the light. And now I don't see the edge there, I just see the colour of the petal behind. Once that's dry, we can irritate this line away, but this line we want to leave now as part of that colour of the petal behind. If you feel like you're going to still have a line, what you can do is just drop in, just like I'm doing now with the tip toe of my brush, you can just drop in a little bit of paint, just so it stays nice and dark and matches that outline. So we'll jump over to the other side. I've got a little bit of an interesting area around here where it was a bit tricky. The paper was behaving a bit badly on this corner. I've started to put a little bit of shadow on there, but I just want to run through that with you. So I'm just going to use cobalt blue on its own as a little shadow glaze. And the reason I'm using the blue is I want it to look quite shadowy, but I also don't want it to go even more purple. So I just want it to sort of cool it down. So I've got quite a watery cobalt blue, and I'm just going to go over the shadow area there. Just with a clean light blue glaze. I always head for cobalt blue if I want to put something into a shadow, but I also want it to stay looking pretty because it's such a sweet colour. It makes a really nice shadow. And then where it softens into the petal, I'm just going to soften that edge there. And I'll just say I've got a little bit of damage on that corner there. When you have a little bit of damage on your paper, you'll find that the colour sits into it a little bit darker. Try not to fiddle with that area too much. See how your glaze dries. It might just flatten out and go away, in which case you don't need to worry. But if it does stay as a mark, then you can sometimes just tickle around it and sort of feather away the mark. Hopefully we'll be lucky and it won't make any silly moves. So I'm going to use that cobalt blue up on the other part of the petal up here, this large petal here. So I'm going to use this as a shadow colour for the whole half of this petal, but also when it goes in here, it goes to a lovely sort of very pale, almost sort of lemony colour, but it's not lemon, so I'm going to mix some cobalt blue with some lemon just to see if that will create the colour that I need, which is quite nice. It's sort of like a very cool green, and I'm going to pick up my blue, just make it a little bit stronger, and I'm going to put it just over where I want the shadow and try and get those really nice folds identified. Take it right up to the corner like so, and then I'm going to bring it down and then when I get to that little area that looks quite sort of lemony and fresh, I'm going to quickly clean my brush and pick up that very pale green and continue down. And I didn't use masking fluid for my stigma or style, I just used working around it. I just worked around it, so I drew it up and worked around it, but you could use masking fluid if you wanted. So that very pale green just gives me a little bit of shadow going into that petal centre. So what I did there is I continued with that little bit of cobalt blue just into that corner, and I think actually I'm going to use a little bit of the blue violet as well, because this isn't as bright as that on the photograph. I want to just tone it down, so I'm using the blue violet just on that little hip there where they've got a nice little fold kicking out, and just blend it into the blue. Again, there's a couple of little bits of damage to the paper up here. I don't know how it happens. Sometimes you get unlucky with the sheet that just comes that way. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to not panic about it. We'll sort it out afterwards. So it's a little bit of cobalt blue across this corner. This is our second wash, so we've already done our first wash. And then where the cobalt blue finishes, just soften away the edge there so you get a nice soft edge to your shadow. And then I went with that very, very pale green through the middle. And as I say, we've just painted around those fiddly bits in the middle. And what we'll do is we'll just concentrate on those in a moment. Let's try and get the folds and the shadow onto the petals first. So the other thing that I'm going to do is just with a little bit of the lilac, I'm going to just define the fold here. There's a little fold that comes across, and I'm just going to use a little sharp line to show that fold there. And I'm going to just take that into a nice little crease there as well. So just some tiny little details, and then allow that petal to completely rest. So that little area behind here is a little bit too big, so I'm going to match in with a little bit of the dark Zazine. I'm just going to perfect this little curl here. So what I'm going to do is create my new edge, and then just very gently add in a little bit of missing colour, and then just gently tap the edge of that, and then allow that to dry, because we're going to put some veins over that, so hopefully that will be tucked away nicely into there. So let's look at this petal here. We've got this petal with all these lovely veins coming out, and I think on that one I'm going to put the veins on first. I'm going to use the blue violet because it's nice and pale, and I'm going to follow the midrib, which I put on after the first glaze. So we're going to get that tucking around the corner, and then do the one next to it, like so. You can draw these up very, very lightly with a sharp 2H pencil and give yourself a little guide. You don't have to do it freehand. What I want to do is get you to look at how the veins turn in, so they're tucking over there, creating that curl and the foreshortened leaf, petal as it turns in, and then a nice sweep out, and then watch how it just disappears. It just disappears like so. So just let your brush just fade away, and then a damp brush over the top to soften. So it's quite a nice little process, and this paint goes on really nicely, so you should get some nice fine lines. I'm using a size 2 brush, and now what I'm going to do is put the little branches coming out the side, so roughly work out where they are, little sweep like that, and then a quick sweep over with a damp brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint all those little veins on there, and then I'm going to jump to this one up here, which should be dry by then, and we'll put the veins onto this one and just do them really lightly. Copy the photograph, because the softer they are, the more natural the flower will look. And then if you feel like you're in the swing of it, you can start to put on some of these main veins up here. So just work your way across, putting on a little bit of a fine line and then softening over. So what I want to do now that I've put in all of my soft veinings, is I want to look at the stigma. Just this lovely, it's like lots of little juicy branches that are really pale, like a really pale lilac, and they're sort of quite, look like they're made of jelly. Let me see if I can show you on a flower. I'll just borrow that one for a minute. I don't know if we can make this out with the camera. These little chaps here. So these are the stamen, and this is the little style and stigma, and you can see they're like little juicy pale branches, very, very pale. Obviously sometimes they're a little bit darker, sometimes they're a little bit lighter, but sometimes they're so pale and transparent it's really hard to see them in the photograph. So I did have a little bit of a problem up here, and what I want to do is show you a couple of little cheats for that. The other problem that I had was my petal coming forward. I just left too much of a fold coming forward, so I want to show you how I adjust that. So 2 little cheats, and also how we're going to work around these very small little stigma here. So first of all, let's deal with this curved petal, because it's just not making me happy. I'm going to use a little bit of dark Cezine purple, and I'm going to recreate the shape that I want. So I'm going to go a little bit higher with the pitch of the petal. so that just the pointiest part where it curls over. I'm going to bring forward a couple of little veins just to show that the veins are heading towards us. Like so. Just bring those to curl round, curl round. So I'm creating a little bit more of a curl by just showing a few of the veins just tipping over. And then I want to take a little fine line and take it right out to the edge of the petal there. And just using a light bit of lilac, just fill in the little gap between the new edge and the old edge. Hopefully you won't have gone too dark, so that should give you quite a nice little fix on that corner. On the other side, I want to push it up a little bit. That's going to be harder. So what I'm going to do is, with a bit of kitchen towel, I'm going to lose this edge that I've put on with my eradicator. And all I'm going to do is just put a little bit of water onto it. And just lose the hard line. Very gently dab away. So what I'm trying to do is remove the edge that I made, and also any sort of hard lines that are there in between. And I'm going to use the eradicator a little bit this way as well, just to sort of wiggle through. And then dab away any excess paint. I'm going to let that dry, and it's going to dry fairly swiftly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the kitchen towel over the top and just use my polished stone, and that's basically to repair any damage that I did by wiggling the eradicator over that area. And I'm going to let that dry and settle while I go over to my other little cheat, which is to do with my stain and filaments. So what I've got here is I've got a nice little pleat. I'm going to put that on first, and that's this little pleat here. So I'm going to put a little bit of water onto this petal first. Just put a little bit of lilac coming through there just to create this little pleat. So water first, so I don't have to worry about softening the edge too much. It should just be nice and soft. Just wipe either side just to make sure the pleat settles, and you can tap through just to get it to sit nice and evenly there. Then I've got a really nice little branch that's coming out here and turning in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a proper cheat. I'm going to use a little bit of the bleed proof white. You could use titanium white if you've got that. I'll just use what's in the lid. And just at the top of my little stigma branches, I'm just going to put a tiny amount of white paint. So I probably should have masked them out in order to make them, to keep them light, but I didn't, and I also lost a little bit of definition. So what I'm doing is just using this as a tiny little fix. And if you just use it very, very carefully, no one will be any the wiser. Well, they will if they watch this. But as I say, I sometimes do use a little bit of white paint, but you use it sparingly. So I'm putting a little bit at the top of my branches, and then very gently teasing it down. What you can do as well is, if it sits a little bit proud, because sometimes the paint does sit a bit proud because we're using it in such small amounts, it sometimes just sits in a position you don't want it to. You can dab with the paper and then go back over it again. So I'm going to just put a little bit on the top of each of these little branches just to make it stand out. I think what I'll do is I'll do it in several little stages, so I'll just get them established at the moment with a little bit of white paint, and then probably let them dry and polish them again, and then come back to them in just a mo. So while that's settling, these are like little cheats, little they're little tips for putting things right. Sometimes things don't always go to plan. And I'm going to just soften away a little bit of a hard bit of paint there, a little bit of dark paint there, which I don't want, just a little bit too dark on that top edge. Now what I'm going to do is come back with my Dioxazine purple, and I'm going to create the edge that I want. So I'm going to take the finest line I can muster, and I'm going to bring that edge just a little bit higher up. Ignoring my original edge and just coming a little bit higher up. So the finest line you can muster, because you don't want to make another great big mistake. Okay, so we'll let that dry. When that's completely dry, we can then try and match underneath. So while we're letting both of those areas dry, we'll trundle on down to these little branches down here. And what I'm going to do is try and match the colour behind, for the petal that's sitting behind, and leave the shape of the sigma sitting proud. So at the moment I'm using just a very pale bit of lilac, and I'm just very gently, once I've done the outline, just slightly dabbing around it to get the colour of the background mapped in. So it's a really slow process, this one, but it's really worth it because you do get a really nice effect at the end of it. So find the edge that you want to work from, and then very gently make good the petal behind. It's slow, but it's effective, and when you're dealing with something as fine and as light and juicy as this, it's really, it looks really good in the end. So nice and slow, match the background, perfect the shape first with the lightest of lilacs, and then work around depicting each branch. Off we go. So I'm going to come back and put just a little bit more white on the branches up here. I say branches, we know what we're talking about. And you can polish in between, but what I want to do is just put a little bit more white on them, just to make them stand out a bit more, and we'll let them dry a little bit longer. So now let's return to our little repair. I want to use a little bit of Helios purple mixed with the Dioxazine purple. Just warm it up a little bit, make it a little bit prettier. And then I'm going to use that to fill in that little gap. So I'm going to just drop a little bit of the colour on just to see how it sits first. Put a little bit of colour on, and then with a damp brush sort of tease it into position. Very dark underneath here, And obviously we've done a little bit of repair, so the paper will be a bit annoyed with us. So just take it very gently, just dropping it under my new edge. And once we've filled in a little bit of colour, we can leave that to dry. You don't have to live with the darkness, so if you put it on a bit too dark, you can still lift through for some light. Just be very gentle, because the paper will be getting very annoyed with us at that stage. So I'm going to jump above that and put some nice little glazes on to start pushing and pulling the painting together. And I'm going to jump over to a colour that we use that's a little bit controversial. It sort of sits with the Opera Rose as a bit of a unusual colour to have on the palette, but I love it so. This is Shinhan Bright Violet. This is another colour that has brighteners in it, so years down the line it will fade, but it will still remain a purpley pink, just maybe not as bright as when we first put it on, but it's still a really pretty colour. So I'm going to use that right on this top edge here for this petal, and then just a little glaze to bring some pretty purple into this area there. So put a little bit of colour on, and then because I want it to be lighter, I'm going around it. I'm just going to soften the paint and then soften the edge. So it's a little bit of an exaggeration to the colour that's on the photograph, on the reference photograph. So you can use a different colour if you'd rather go more blue. You can use a little bit of cobalt blue with a bit of pink. I quite like that little bit of sort of pinky purple up there. So that's that, and then I want to use a little bit of the cobalt blue just on this edge here, which will also soften some of the marks that I've made. So a tiny little bit of cobalt blue just underneath there, and a little bit for that shadow just on that corner. So put the colour on really, really gently, because it's a small area, and then we've done a little repair next to it, so we don't want to upset the paper any more than we have to. If you ever have to do any little repairs, remove what you don't want, polish the paper flat so that you've reduced any sort of tearing on the paper or any nap, and then when you come back to repair the area, always use a slightly drier paint, so you're almost drawing with the colour so that you don't upset the paper again. Just putting that little twist on that top petal there. So now what we're going to do is put some nice little glazes on to really start to put the shadows on. We've already put a little shadow on here, so I want to continue doing the shadows, and then we'll come back, perfect all of the edges and that little bit of style as well. So let's start mixing up some colours that are really going to make it pop. What I want to do is I want to clean my palette, because this is sort of the final thing, and we want the colours to be really clean. So I'm going to remove all of my greens and purples and start afresh. Always when I'm doing like little glazes on anything, I quite like to have a clean palette, because then you know the colours you're putting on are lovely. So I'm going to have a little bit of my Shinhan Bright Violet up here. That would be nice for some areas. I'd quite like to have some dark steam purple just on its own, some cobalt blue on its own, and then some cobalt blue mixed with Helios purple. That makes a very pretty lilac. Let's start with those, and if we need any of the yellows or the warm colours, we'll mix those up on the hoof, as it were. So that's an expression that people use. I think it means that you mix it up as you go along. So start at the top of your painting and work your way down, and avoid any areas that are ongoing problems. So I'm going to start at the top here. I'm going to use that, oh look what's happened on my palette. I'm going to use the Helios purple with the cobalt blue, and I'm going to use that for this top edge up here. I'm going to put a little bit of colour on and then soften underneath. It's a little bit pinker on the reference photograph, but I'm going to go with that pretty lilac. I'm going to use a little bit of the Shinhan Bright Violet. I'm going to use that on this corner up here. This is where you can use a bit of artistic license. You can put a few little colours on that you just really love, that complement and embellish the plant. As long as they're not too far away from the actual plant colour, you can get away with it. And remember that colours are only the way they are depending on the light that they're being seen in. So if we had bright orange lights on this, everything would be painted in grey. Just, you know, it's just one of those weird things that we learned at art school, that colour is dependent on the light it's viewed in. So I'm going to jump around. The other colour that I might mix up, just having a little go at those two colours, is Opera Rose mixed with a little bit of Cobalt Blue. So this colour, Opera Rose and Cobalt Blue, you need to keep it stirred together, but that's a really pretty colour for doing a really pretty colour wash over an area. So I'm going to put that little petal over there into another shade darker. It's important when you're putting these little colour washes on for the shadows and everything, not to work too close to one another. So do keep jumping around like we do, like we always have done, you know, move around so you don't have a wet edge anywhere. So I think the Cobalt Blue and the Helios Purple will be the next little glaze. And that's on this little chap over here. And the other thing to remember is when you're putting a little colour wash over something, or a tea glaze over something, make sure that you match the exact edges. So I'm going to use that same colour to put on a little shadow here. We've already got some on from the first glaze, but I want to make it a little bit darker. Just putting that glaze on and softening the edge. And I'm going to move that softening edge back a little bit, just because I want it just to stay really soft. So what I'll do is I'll do a few petals, making my way rather down the painting, and if I come across something that needs a little bit more explanation, I'll stop and walk you through it. So this lower petal here, I've come to this one here, I'm a little bit worried about getting purple onto the lemon area of this. So I'm going to put clean water over the lemon area. Bring it down to there, and then stir up the Helios Purple with the Cobalt Blue, and I'm going to drop that from the water down to the bottom, and that way I don't worry about it moving uphill or leaving a tide mark anywhere near the yellow. Keep an eye on the tiptoe of your brush. You want that so it meets the exact edge of your original glaze. So come back up to this big petal, because this is a mighty petal to do a glaze on. So again, I'm going to do the same thing, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a little bit of yellow, so a little bit of lemon, and I'm going to mix that with a tiny little bit of Helios Purple. Now, why am I using those two together? I want something that's a little bit warmer than yellow, but I don't want it to be a particular colour. I want it almost to be like a sort of slightly creamy colour. So I'm using the pink as opposed to the purple. And that's going to be my watery glaze around the bottom area. You might not see it this colour, but I just want this little bit of warmth just here. And then above that, I'm going to go for the cobalt with the Helios purple and sit that next to it. So I get a really nice warmth right in the centre of the flower. And then around that, some water, so that I keep that lovely light around the edge. And then I'm going to go for the cobalt blue on this little bend here, just to sort of cool that little area down. And a little bit of cobalt blue into the centre, just like so. And then while that's settling, I'm going to use a little bit of the dioxazine purple watered down and just drop that in to move this little edge up a little bit. And also get that little darker colour just in there. So I'm laying the brush back so it's catching the water that I put on this lower paler area, so that I get that little bit of shade coming down. And it also leaves me that teeny weeny little edge of the petal as it curves forward. So continuing down on here, I'm going to put a little bit of water again down here, and using my dioxazine purple, just watered down again a little bit, I'm going to put some of these little shady folds that you can see, creases in the petal. So I'm just dropping the dark purple just under where the crease is. If you feel like it's just blurring everywhere, then just wait a little moment, because the water will start to evaporate. You can also dry your colour out a little bit more so it stays put a little bit more, and that will give you a bit more control as to where the darks go. So a little bit of softening around them just to control them. And then I'm going to go for my cobalt blue mix. Just go a little bit smaller, sorry, a little bit paler, smaller, a little bit lighter and paler with these little creases up here. Put 3 little marks on, and I'm just going to soften them in like so. Very subtle. Now I'm going to use the cobalt blue just to increase this fold across here. It's a lovely fold, so I'm just going to lay back my brush and just put some cobalt blue there. Don't do it if your petal's still wet, but if it's dried out like mine had, you can put a little bit more of a glaze over the top. And then I can use that cobalt blue either side of that little ridge just to make it stand out a little bit more. See, I'm always softening everything in, always watching the edges. That's the most important thing. When you put something on, don't walk away until you're sure that the edges are going to be really lovely. Once you're happy with the edges, that's when you can let it rest. So I'm going to put a little bit of pale pinky lilac just on this edge here and soften that in. And then a little bit more of the cobalt blue just on the inside here, just to make that tuck in. So how do we know what colours to use? I always think to myself, you know, why did I choose that colour? And it always comes back to the warm and the cool. So if I want something to look a little bit sort of cool shade, I will use a more blue tone. And if I want something to look really warm and cosy, then I'll use a slightly sort of reddish or golden shade of colour. And it's really just you get used to playing that sort of like little yin and yang when you're building your painting up. So let's continue putting our glazes on. Down here, this is almost sort of quite silvery down here, so I'm going to put a little cool cobalt glaze over most of it, but leave the really bright areas white, so I get a really nice little jump of light where the petal bends rather. And I'm just going to put a little cobalt over the edge so it's not quite so loud. It's not white, so we need to just give that a little bit of a colour. Just that little folded edge. And then just blend that in as well, that little corner there. And then what I'm going to do is wipe a clean brush through the highlight so that that little cobalt blue softens towards the light. So we can use various little shades like that to start building up the little shadowy areas in here. And I'm going to go for the pink, the opera rose with a little bit of cobalt, and put a little glaze of that colour in here. These small areas dry really quickly, so you can work a little bit quicker. You know, you can put little glazes on. But if you're at all worried, work in a different area until you're 100% sure that something's dry. And then I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt blue just at the bottom there. So pink to blue there, cosy to cool. And then I'm just going to catch the edge there so I don't get a hard line underneath that little curl. So I think at the moment we've covered everything that we need to, that I need to tell you. I'm going to come back now to the little corrections that I made. So I'm going to use my polishing stone, and I get another clean piece of kitchen towel, and I'm going to polish over where I've put the extra white paint. That helps to sort of flatten down the paint and make it nice and smooth, and gets rid of any little gritty bits on top. And then I'm going to flatten down the area that I've been repairing, that little forward turning on that petal. Obviously make sure that when you are polishing any of your paintings that you haven't got anything underneath your actual painting, otherwise you'll get a little brass rubbing of whatever was on the table. So here all I'm going to do now, I'll keep my kitchen towel, is any little areas that I'm not happy with, I'm just going to gently remove. So there's a little hard edge here. I'm just going to use the brush to very lightly lift a little bit of that colour away. Noisy old paper, but it does really help. I'm also going to soften those little veins that I did on the other side and just make them a little less proud. And then I'm going to use a little bit of my white paint, just the smallest amount, put it on the palette away from where you're working, a little bit of purple into it, just the tiniest bit of purple into the white, and I'm going to put a little bit of light retrieval here. If I dig away at the paper, I will end up with a mess, so this is just a very small little repair, just to bring a little bit of highlight onto this side of the petal. So I'm just putting a small amount of paint just on that edge. It's so subtle, you'll barely know it's white paint when it's dry. But it just makes me feel happier because it makes me feel like I've retrieved a difficult point. Just a little bit there, just to recreate that lovely little bit of light on the corner. So you're using hardly any paint at all, it's just a little tiny bit of tiny coloured white paint just to reproduce that little bit of light. Okay, so on the little stigma, what I'm going to do is just very gently stroke some of that white down for the sort of filaments that hold them together. And then I'm going to use a tiny little bit of lilac and basically just drop a little bit of lilac into them. And put a little bit on, and then with a bit of water, just blend it in. because what I don't want is I don't want them to sort of stand out as like really bright white blobs. I want them to be a little bit lilac-y. So I'm watering down the lilac, I'm putting it sort of into the main body of the little bobble at the end, like so. Stop, let it dry, and if you're happy with the level of brightness that you've got on there, then walk away and leave that to dry. And what I'm going to do now is continue doing my little tea washes and shadows and see if we can start to build this together. And I'll come back just for this little throat here and this little area here. Those are the two difficult areas that we need to adjust. So the last little thing to do once you've been fiddling around and sorting everything out is we've got to get rid of that little hard edge along here. So what I'm going to do is use the eradicator and just very, very gently, barely touch the paper and just wiggle it very gently along the edge, and then just a quick flick with your kitchen towel. You don't want to make it very, very wet because you'll dislodge your lovely glaze. What we're trying to do is just get the very, very edge of the paint to lift away. And take it to as far as you dare. If you feel like you're taking off too much paint, then stop. As long as you've got rid of the edge, that's the main objective. And I'm barely touching the paper. It's literally the last little tip of the hair on the eradicator. And on the last little wiggle, I don't dab because I don't want to lift any more paint off. So that's that little corner. And then what I want to do is put a little bit of shade on this bud. So I'm just going to put a little bit of cobalt blue just over here, just to sort of soften that down, and a little bit of yellow, and that's the yellow and pink. So I'm just putting a little bit of yellow and pink there just to warm that up. And then that will tie up behind here to this little area here. Now this little area has had a little bit of orange, orangey yellow, and a little bit of purple and some little bits of blue for the veining. But there's a green aura to it. So I'm going to use a bit of lemon, a little bit of cobalt blue, and with a very watery green, I'm going to use that as my shade colour. I think that will bring the colour down nicely, putting it into the shade but also cooling it down. Just leave that to dry. If it needs another glaze, you can just put another one over the top once it's dry. The other area that we're going to do is this centre area. So there is quite a lot of veining going on in there, but it's quite warm. So I'm going to use a little bit of Cenelia yellow and then add the smallest amount of lilac to it and water it down. So it's sort of like a dirty yellow. And I'll use that to put on the veins. When you put the veins on, just go very slowly and paint what you see. It's really to sort of show the direction of what's happening down here as all of the petals are coming down into the trumpet. So there'll be a little bit of space between the veining. They won't all come to one point. They'll be heading down into the centre. And I'm going to add a little bit of quinacridone gold just where it tucks round and the yellow almost becomes defining this little edge as it curls in, like so. I think what's been fun about this project is the amount of very sort of delicate fine veining that we've had to do, and just sort of getting used to your brush and moving it around on its point, which has been really nice. There's a lovely combination of the lovely wet in wets and then a little bit of soft veining and then a little bit of perfecting. I think it's a really lovely flower to do. So I'm going to use a little bit of lilac, just random lilac from the palette, and I'm going to give myself a really nice sharp edge to this bud because I just slightly went over the edge with my glaze, so I want to get a really nice clean edge. And just soften behind that just to blend that new line in. And I'm just going to dab just a little bit so I don't end up with too much of a double line. And I'm going to use a little bit of the green on the opposite side just to get a really nice clean sharp edge. And while I'm there I can just very gently tap in a little bit more green on the inside just to make it the right tone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the painting on its side and just run through the stem finishing, because we just put the first glaze on, and as you can see I've worked on this stem already. So I want to turn it around and just talk you through that stem, and maybe we'll just add one little leaf down here from our live flowers just so that you can see how the leaf attaches. And it's actually a little sepal leaf that sits around another branch of the flower, but it's a really nice little thing to paint, so let's paint that in as well. So we'll just quickly finish the stem and do that little leaflet, and then hopefully you've got enough information to complete your freesia study. So first of all I'm going to mix up some Sennelier yellow with some phthalocyanine blue and get a really nice mid bright green. And I'm just going to continue the stem a little bit, just how we did before, with a little bit of water down the middle. I'm just going to use the one green just to continue the stem for a bit. I know we did two greens before. We're going to do the top edge. So we put the water down the middle and we're laying that top edge, how I've got the painting arranged, I feel like it's the top and bottom edge. And then run some green along the bottom edge, and the water in the middle should maintain a highlight through the centre. It gets a little bit more complicated when you want to change the highlight around, but for now we just do the highlight in the centre. And just to encourage them to soften together, just run your brush through again, just to maintain that light. So we'll leave that to dry, and I'll just get my little leaf to work from. So here I've got this real stem, which I'm just going to lie down there. Might just put a little bit of paper underneath the flower just in case it does anything silly to my paper. So what I want to do is I want to put this little chap on here, and I'm going to mix up the colour just a little bit darker. So I'm going to mix a little bit of French ultramarine and Sennelier yellow and a little bit of phthalocyanine, just so it's a little bit darker. I'm going to put a tiny bit of water on there. I'm going to ignore the little stalk. Just putting that little sepal on. I'm going to put a little bit of water on there, like so. Use the mid-green, and here I'm going to join it onto the stem like so, but I'm going to run it up to about there and then jump over the highlight and continue the green the other side. Then very gently put your brush in the middle where the highlight is and just tease between the two, so you get a nice little bit of soft light between the two areas of green. And then I'm using my very dark green here to make a little seat underneath the leaf where it sits on the stem. So I'm just making a little dark shadow where it sits and meets the stem, and then soften that in. Just a small amount of paint, but just get right underneath it. And then back to my mid-green, I'm just going to create a little bit of a sort of silvery edge to this, just by bringing the edge out just a tiny bit and leaving just the smallest gap of light. While that's drying, what we do is go back to our lovely stem. I'm going to make it a little bit more electric by adding in some lemon, because it's a beautiful juicy green. And then what I'm going to do is paint this brighter green on this side. Bring the colour along with you, and then soften towards the light. Pick up the colour, we're going to jump the leaf and bring that colour about halfway across, maybe just less than halfway across, and about 4 or 5 centimetres or less if need be, and just catch the top edge. What we're doing is we're bringing that lovely juicy green out, which is really indicative of these stems. Keep your brush on its tiptoe, and always, as you're going up the stem, perfect the outline of the stem. So you're trying to create a really nice, smooth, long stem. A little bit of paint, a little bit of water just above. Run it a little bit ahead and rest. So I'll continue all the way up to the top of the plant, adding my nice juicy green to this side, and then we'll see how that dries, and if we need to add another little bit of shadow, we can. So what I'm doing now is I'm just perfecting the outline of my stem and just bringing a little bit of colour further across from the other side, making more of the light down the middle. I'm going to come back now to my dark green, and I'm going to put the nice little veins that I can see on the little leaf. So brush on its tiptoe and run the nice lines through the light and up to the top. Go through the light, because then you can often see the veins a little bit clearer through the highlight. And what you can do where it gets a little bit darker is you can just go over the top of those veins and just collide a little area, so the veins collide to make it a little bit darker. And then a little bit of the brighter green just to finish it off. When the veins are dry, they'll dry very, very quickly. You can just sweep over another little bit of green just to bring the colour up. Finishing touches. And I'm just going to bring my brush right up onto its tiptoe and just give it very, very fine darker edge to this leaf, just where it just curls under. It's It's got a really nice little fine edge. There'll be a little cast shadow as well, so let's put that on while we're here, just as our last hurrah. So I'm going to put a little shadow coming across and just taper it off, almost to mirror that little leaf. Well, I've enjoyed painting this beautiful fuchsia. It's another one of those flowers that people kept asking me to do. So I'm really pleased that we've got that in. And I've also put it landscape, so it could be another page to make up our sketchbook pages. So if you want to work like me on the landscape, what we've done is we've measured in and put a line so that we've got somewhere safe that we can use for binding our sketchbook pages together. I really hope you've enjoyed this, and I really hope you give it a go. I know I say that every time, but I absolutely love seeing your paintings on the forum, so I'd really be pleased to see these beautiful lilac freesias there too. Enjoy.